Hello, and welcome to Retirement Readiness despite COVID-19. Welcome not only to our webinar, but to our collective new reality. Typically, we would be welcoming you in person in seminar style, which means we'd be pointing out where the restrooms are and where refreshments are located. But given the current circumstances, you're probably at home and you already know where these things are. Anyway, we congratulate you for being here today because it says a lot about who you are. You're a planner, you're a provider, you're action-oriented. You realize you don't have all the answers. In fact, you may have more questions than answers at this point. So grab a pen and paper to jot down some concepts and, more importantly, any questions that you'll undoubtedly have. And just an FYI, we are recording this presentation. Couple of housekeeping things. This presentation is designed to be interactive. While we can't answer live questions, you can ask them in the chat box on your control panel. Now, we work with clients in a team approach, and our experienced financial professionals, Kelsey Banke and Julie Chadwick, are moderating the chat. So for computer users, this is on the right-hand side of your screen. And for mobile users, there's a little chat icon in a circle on your device. Now, throughout the webinar, we're going to be doing something called polls. In fact, we're going to have one right now so that you get used to it. So in your control panel, you're going to see a poll, and you're going to see a question come up for you to answer. Since this webinar is about retirement planning, our first question will be, when are you planning to retire? Just choose one of the options. Now, for mobile users, once you've answered this question, you may have to hit a little arrow to come back to the presentation. Okay, great. I can see that people are answering those. Okay, today's presentation is informational and educational. Today's webinar is actually part one of a two-part series, and part two is a complimentary strategy session. By complimentary, I mean no charge to you. We structure it this way because we know that when you learn something new, more times than not, you're going to have questions about the information or about how it actually applies to your personal situation. And we're committed to making sure you get the most out of this webinar by getting any follow-up questions that you have answered. So you're going to see on your screen that something where you can schedule that strategy session. That type of button is something that you just click on, and it will take you to a virtual scheduler. You're going to be able to see that a couple more times as we go through this tonight. So if you don't catch it right now, you'll catch it as we go through things. Now, by being here today, you've seized a great opportunity. You've invested your time to learn more about retirement planning. And as with any investment, you're expecting a return on your investment. So our goal is to make this investment of your time very worth your while. By the time we're done today, you're going to know more about retirement planning and how it works. You'll know what to consider around healthcare issues that are part of retirement decisions. You'll know how to have a good financial plan in place and how it can support the strength of your investment experience and retirement experience. And for good measure, we'll share with you one of the most important aspects of retirement planning, which is called avoiding sequence of returns risk. Also, by the time we conclude, you'll have an opportunity to sign up for your no-cost strategy session. As a result of our time together, we hope that you'll feel more confident in your ability to retire despite the current COVID-19 crisis. So before we go any further, I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Mary Stirk. I'm the CEO and founder of Stirk Financial Services. I've been in the industry for 26 years, and Stirk Financial Services was founded in 2004. We have a number of financial advisors in our 3 locations: Dakota Dunes, South Dakota, Kansas City, Missouri, in the Zona Rosa area, and Storm Lake, Iowa. Now, over the years, we've done 7 acquisitions of other firms. And although we have a strong commitment to our Midwest roots, we do have clients that we work with in over 40 states. We've been honored to have made the Forbes list for Best in State Wealth Advisor and a separate list for Top Women in Wealth, not 1, not 2, but 3 years running. I'm also the author of the book, Ready to Pull the Retirement Trigger, which was a bestseller on Amazon in 6 countries. The Stirk Financial logo says plan, protect, grow, and that's what we focus on. Holistic planning designed to help protect and grow the wealth that you have. There's a lot of financial advisors out there, but not all financial advisors include planning around all of these areas of your financial life, much less provide coordinated guidance and services for each of these areas in collaboration with your CPAs and attorneys. Our promise to clients is custom design planning, a disciplined investment methodology, and a team fiduciary approach where every client has access to an experienced 4-person team working tirelessly as fiduciaries for their best interest. So what is a fiduciary and why does it matter when it comes to your retirement planning? A fiduciary is someone who has the highest legal duty of one party to another, who is bound ethically to act in the other's best interest. And this is important. You want to make sure that the advisors on your team are fiduciaries. But enough about us. Let's talk about you. What brought you here? What inspired you to invest your time with us today? So let's answer this with a question in your poll section. Is your biggest concern about retirement planning knowing if you have enough money to retire, the taxes during retirement, health-related issues, running out of money, or estate planning? Okay, great. I can see that answers are coming in, and it looks like the top 2 answers right now are knowing if you have enough money to retire and taxes during retirement. Certainly knowing if you have enough is a good question, especially with the current pandemic going on. So what did COVID-19 teach us about retirement? Well, there's probably a lot of different answers to this question. I would say that number 1, it's taught us there are no guarantees, and life as we know it can change in an instant. I also think it's taught us we shouldn't put off retirement, but also that our retirement savings are not as safe as we thought they were. And lastly, I would say it's taught us that our ability to retire when we want or how we had planned to could actually be at risk. So the bottom line is, the world may have changed due to the COVID-19 pandemic, but your retirement planning doesn't have to. So let's examine what hasn't changed. Retirement planning and the need to get it right. You still want to make sure you have enough money to retire. And you might have questions like, when should I retire? When should I claim Social Security, and what are the ramifications of that? Are my investments set up correctly for retirement? What are the tax liabilities that I have on my current investments? What kind of healthcare expenses do I have to cover? Or would it all be covered by Medicare? And finally, what kind of lifestyle will I be able to have? So let's dive into our topic today. Imagine that there are 2 neighbors. Neighbor number 1 is a planner and has a stockpile of toilet paper and is feeling pretty prepared. Neighbor number 2 didn't have a plan and was not prepared and is already out of toilet paper. So which one do you want to be? Does this sound familiar? When it comes to your retirement, if you're feeling a little more like neighbor number 2, then you're in the right place. Even if you're a little more like neighbor number 1, our stockpiles could only last for so long. Now, the daily news cycle and the headlines certainly aren't making us feel any better. They're a constant reminder of the turmoil being created by the COVID-19 pandemic. How much of it's hype and how much of it is truly disruptive and creating an uncertain future, that remains to be seen. But everywhere you look, there are media headlines, and most of them are not positive ones. It starts to get difficult to discern facts from fiction. So let's talk about some market truths, because we want you to be able to retire despite the COVID-19 crisis. Now first, this is being considered a black swan event, and a black swan event is a metaphor that describes an event that comes as a surprise, has a major effect, and often with hindsight, people think we should have been able to see this coming. In recent history, there's been 3 black swan events: the dot-com bubble, the financial crisis, and now the COVID-19 pandemic. The dot-com bubble event lasted from 2000 to 2002. The market was down for 25 months, and it took 42 months to get to full recovery. The financial crisis lasted from 2007 to 2009. During this crisis, the market was down for 17 months, and it took 36 months to get to full recovery. Interestingly enough, though, the financial crisis recession seemed to leave a larger emotional scar on investors. We hear a lot of the time, I don't want to go through another 2008 again, which is very interesting since it was actually a faster recovery than the dot-com bubble was. So the current COVID-19 crisis started in early 2020, and we don't know when it's actually going to end. According to Valor Capital, we saw the worst first quarter ever in the S&P 500 in early 2020. And we've seen ongoing unprecedented government spending and unemployment numbers that have been off the charts. Never has our wealth been so connected to our health. In each of these black swan events, we witnessed all three phases of the stock market cycle: the buy phase, the sell phase, and the third phase, panic. And while the first two, buy and sell, may be inevitable, the third phase, panic, is completely avoidable with the right plan in place. So how can we avoid panic mode? We do it by identifying and addressing the risks that are there when you are getting ready to retire. So let's dive into some of the risks and issues that you face as you get ready for retirement. One of the big ones is affordable health care. Leading up to Medicare age, especially if you retire early, the high cost of health insurance is a major issue. Now, we recommend that people budget for at least $1,000 per person per month for healthcare costs if you retire before Medicare age. Now, Medicare is designed to start at age 65. What you see here are 4 pieces of the typical, most commonly used Medicare scenario. The 2 yellow bubbles are government run. The 2 blue bubbles are government mandated but run by private insurance companies. Medicare Part A typically covers the hospital type of things and doesn't have a cost associated with it. Medicare Part B is covering doctors, and in 2020 is actually around $145 a month. The private side of this, then, most people add a Medicare supplement, also called a Medigap policy, which is designed to cover the things that Part A and Part B don't. That's around $145 a month for the most common program. And then lastly, you have Part D, which is the drug program. That is the prescription drug piece of Medicare, and that can range anywhere from $5 to $500 depending on the type of drugs that you're using and the type of plan that you have. Now, one of the things that you want to be very careful of with Medicare is getting signed up at the right time, especially on the Part D. Because if you do not sign up for Part D when you are supposed to, you will start accumulating a penalty that gets bigger each month. And that penalty isn't something that ever goes away. That penalty gets tacked on to your Part D prescription drug plan cost every month for the rest of your entire life. So this is not one that we want to mess around with and accidentally screw up. You definitely want to get these things done on time. For most people, you'll want to make a trip to your Medicare office or make a phone call to your Medicare office at least 3 months before your benefits are supposed to start when they're 65. Now, some people stay on their group insurance plans beyond age 65, and that might be the right thing for you. But for many people, they'll start in the Medicare system at age 65. Now, you saw me say Part A, Part B, and Part D, but you notice that we left out C. Part C is also known as something called Medicare Advantage, and Medicare Advantage can be an alternate plan to that normal way that more people take Medicare that I just went over. The Medicare Advantage plan tends to combine that Medigap or supplement policy with the drug coverage. Now, this can be a great option for some people, But for other people, it doesn't work well. If you happen to be someone who travels a lot, this might not be a good plan for you. And the reason being is that most Medicare Advantage plans require you to go to in-network doctors, and the network tends to be more of a local network. So keep that in mind as you're making your Medicare selections. Another thing people don't always realize about the Medicare side of things is there is something called the high income beneficiary surcharge. And many people are surprised by this. This can have a significant effect when someone is a high earning spouse and the other spouse has entered the Medicare system. So if you're married or if you're single and you're on Medicare, or one of you is on Medicare, you take your total household income and they're going to decide if there's an extra surcharge that's going to be added on to your cost. Now, we see this happen most frequently with people who have a high income earning spouse, like I said. So it could be that one spouse has retired and is 65 and on Medicare, but the other spouse maybe is 62 and is in a job where they're earning $300,000 or $400,000 a year. In which case, the Medicare spouse, because of the total household income, is going to get hit with a surcharge. So I'm going to go ahead and launch another poll right now. Have you already signed up for Medicare? So go ahead and answer yes or no on that. Have you already signed up for Medicare? Can be kind of a confusing system. And for those of you who have figured it out, kudos. And for those of you who are trying to figure it out, we can definitely help become a resource for you to answer some questions about your Medicare planning. Okay, the next health-related issue that I want to talk about is the dreaded nursing home issue. The reality is that 75% of people over the age of 65 will need some form of long-term care, whether that's in a nursing home, in assisted living, in-home health care, or in hospice. So the long-term care costs can be very high. As you can see here, the average cost of home health care is around $21 an hour. The average cost of a one-bedroom assisted living facility is around $3,300 a month. The average cost of a nursing home is around a little over $80,000 a year. The average nursing home stay is 3 years. Now that's a little bit of an interesting number for people to understand, because if you go to a nursing home for a physical reason, let's say that you broke your hip, the stay is usually much shorter because you can physically heal and leave the nursing home. But if you go to the nursing home for a cognitive reason, like dementia or Alzheimer's, many people are physically healthy, but have those cognitive issues and are ending up in the nursing home for 7, 8, 9, 10 years. It's the average of those two things that brings us to the 3-year number, but please clearly understand that the reason that you need care has a dramatically different length of time that you actually need that care. Now, the top 3 questions that we get from people planning to retire about nursing homes are these. If I want to get insurance, what age should I buy it? Do I actually need it? And what types are there? So first of all, we can answer the top 2 questions very easily in this type of webinar setting. What age should I buy it? The sweet spot for purchasing nursing home insurance is between the ages of 50 to 65. If you buy it much younger than that, you end up paying premium for so long that it becomes cost prohibitive. And if you wait till after age 65 to buy it, the actual cost of it has now gotten so high it can also be cost prohibitive. So the sweet spot is between ages 50 and 65. Do I need it? Again, a really good question, but something that is situational. So let me kind of break it down for you how we tend to look at this. If your total pool of retirement assets is under $300,000, it may not be cost effective for you to spend that money on nursing home insurance. And the reason is because the premiums are high enough that it will eat through that pool of money faster than you probably want it to. Now on the high side, if you have assets that are $3 million or more, you also may not need to insure yourself against nursing home. So the reason that is because you probably can pay for it yourself when you can self-insure when your pool of assets is that large. You may not want to, but you can. But if you're in between those numbers, if you're someone whose retirement asset pool is between $300,000 and $3 million, you're really the person who needs to think about whether or not adding nursing home insurance to your overall strategy is a good idea for you. Okay, what types are there? There's really three main types of nursing home coverage. There's something called traditional coverage, which is a health insurance-based coverage. There's something called hybrid coverage, which is a life insurance-based coverage. And there's something called an asset strategy, which is an investment-based coverage. Now, all three of these different things have pros and cons, and you've probably all heard good things and horror stories about nursing home insurance. There are some types of policies that the premiums are not guaranteed and they can escalate over time to something unaffordable. There are other things where the benefits may not last as long as you'd like them to last. So each of these types of coverage has pros and has cons. So from a nursing home coverage perspective, you really need to have more of a one-on-one conversation with us so we can understand more about your situation to help you determine which type of coverage might be the best type for you to consider, and then start to price it out from there. So we're going to go ahead and launch a poll right now that says, do you want us to get you some quotes for nursing home insurance? If you do, go ahead and hit yes, and if you don't, go ahead and hit no. Okay, moving on to the next topic, when it comes to things that we are trying to control the risk of when it comes to retirement planning, to avoid that panic. We're going to talk a little bit about Social Security. So, first of all, Social Security all triggers off of something called your full retirement age. And you can see the full retirement ages on here. It depends on when you were born, but essentially everybody's full retirement age at this point now is between ages 66 and age 67. Some of them are and a few months, but you can see based on the year of your birth what your full retirement age is. Now, when should you start taking Social Security benefits? Well, that's a darn good question. And the reason that it's such a difficult question for someone to answer is because there's over 500 different combinations of ways that a married couple can actually take their Social Security. So for someone in a webinar to say, this is the way you should take yours, can't really be done. But I am going to educate you on some of the things to be aware of. First of all, you can start at your full retirement age. Again, that's between ages 66 to 67. You also can take it early, and you can go as low as age 62 to start taking it. You also can delay taking it and delay it to as late as age 70. Now, people like the idea of delaying it sometimes because every month that you delay, it's going to go up a little bit. And over the course of a year, there would be an 8% increase in the amount of your Social Security by delaying taking it for a year. So your full retirement age is going to be something that they've calculated, and if you take it early, it'll be smaller, and if you take it later, it'll be bigger. However, once you get to age 70, there's no more increase. So there's no discernible good reason that you would want to delay taking your Social Security beyond age 70. Okay. When you think about taking it early, there's also some limitations. So if you take Social Security before your full retirement age, you now have an earnings limit. And for 2020, the earnings limit is $18,240. They update this in future years sometime after the first of the year. So if you've taken your Social Security early and you go over this earnings limit, you now have to pay back Social Security, and let me tell you, that's going to be the least favorite check you'll ever have to write in your life, is to pay Social Security back. So don't go over it. If you're going to go over that, you should stop your early Social Security or talk to the Social Security office about what your options are. Now, once you get to your full retirement age, you no longer have this earnings limit. You can earn as much as you want and still take your Social Security, and there is no cap and there is no payback. It only happens when you're taking it early. There's also some unique rules surrounding Social Security and marriage. So there's special rules for married people, for divorced people, and for people who've lost their spouse. There's so many different ways that this can happen that we can't go into all of it. But one of the things that I want to make sure you understand is that there are quirky things for each one of these. So I'm going to highlight them. Married people, if you are married and you have one spouse that's been a high earner and one spouse that didn't work or maybe has been a lower earner, you may be eligible for something that's called a spousal benefit. And you may be able to get your benefit boosted up to at least half of what the higher earners is. Now again, every situation is different and you're going to want to ask that at your Social Security office. But I will tell you that we did have a woman come to one of our presentations. She heard me talking about this and she thought to herself, you know, my Social Security isn't anywhere near half of what my husband's is. So she went down to the Social Security office and she talked to them and she was able to get not only about a $400 a month raise in her amount that she was getting, but she also got over $10,000 worth of back pay. So that leads me to tell you that Social Security might not volunteer information to you. You have to know what questions to ask. They're trying to provide data. They're not trying to counsel you on the best way to do something. The quirky thing about divorced people is that if you've been married multiple times for more than 10 years, you can pick a spouse. So whichever spouse was the highest earner, you can elect to possibly get a spousal benefit from their amounts. Now, for people who've unfortunately lost a spouse, the main thing I want to convey for you is that there's a possibility that you won't even have to wait until age 62 to take your benefits. You might be able to start them as early as age 60. But every situation is personal and it requires action by you. Okay, so before we move on to estate planning, I'm going to launch another poll. Have you already started your Social Security? Yes or no? Okay, the next facet of retirement planning that I want to talk about is estate planning, because it's time to get your legal ducks in a row. And this is what we call a 3-pack of documents that we recommend that everybody has when it comes to their estate planning: a will, a financial power of attorney, and a healthcare power of attorney. The will is going to say who gets your stuff if you are no longer alive. The financial power of attorney is a standby document, and that says who's going to make financial decisions for you if you're mentally incapable of taking those decisions and making them yourself. The healthcare power of attorney is also a standby document. So in the event that you can't make your own healthcare decisions, this person is designated to make them for you. It's also the pull the plug, don't pull the plug, but a little bit broader than that. Now, these 3 documents are the minimum documents that everyone should have. If you don't have these and you pass away and you don't have a will, the state that you live in is going to decide what happens with your stuff. And I don't know about you, but for me, I don't want the state that I live in to make that kind of decision. I want to decide that for myself. So I highly encourage everyone to get these documents in a row. So now you're going to see a poll come up that says, do you have a will? Go ahead and answer that yes or no. Okay, you might think that Medicare, Social Security, and estate planning are the primary issues to deal with when it comes to planning for retirement. And for some retirement planning presentations, it might be. But there's still more to this story, a lot more. And that's where we as holistic fiduciaries bring a lot of experience and value to the table for our clients. But before we move on, if you've already heard enough today to know that you'd like to proceed with your free 20-minute strategy session, we'll take a minute now to make this offer available. So on your screen, you'll see a box pop up. You can click on this to take you to our scheduling page where you can claim your time to talk to me one-on-one. Again, this is a no cost, no obligation call, just to learn a little bit more about your situation and to get any specific questions you have answered. As a result of this call, in addition to getting your question answered, one of 2 things will happen. Number 1, we agree that there are additional ways that we might be able to help you, in which case we'll schedule a follow-up discussion. Or number 2, we agree that you have everything you need from us and we just part as friends. So we encourage everyone to schedule this so you can get your individual questions answered. just choose the option for a 30-minute virtual session. That'll give us a few extra minutes blocked out on my calendar to make sure you have ample time. Okay, now let's go back to that panic mode concept. We've addressed some of the risks associated with Medicare, long-term care, Social Security, and estate planning. But another big risk has to do with your emotions. It's one thing to know that black swan events and bear markets don't last forever. We understand this in our head, but when we're faced with a falling market, this is where our emotions can really get the best of us. I think we can all relate to how our emotions change as the market experiences its up and downs. We start out optimistic. As the market climbs, we start to feel elated at these new highs. Then as the market declines, we start to get nervous first. And then as it falls further, we become fearful. And then again, as it recovers, we become optimistic, and the cycle starts all over again. Staying disciplined through rising and falling markets can pose a big challenge for a lot of people, but it really is crucial for long-term success. One of the symptoms of being in panic mode is thinking that you can time the market. Now, what do I mean by timing the market? Well, timing the market is the concept of pulling money out of the market when it's falling to avoid losing more money, with the plan of getting back into it near the bottom to enjoy the gains that come with recovery. But in reality, it's a guessing game, and one that it's really hard to get right. And you know what? It hardly ever works. So what you can do is actually perform a quality check on your investments. Now, there's over 20,000 different mutual funds out there that someone can use. So how do you know if yours are above average or below average? There's a lot of different data out there that you can use, and this is an excerpt from a Morningstar investment detail report. So if you look at your screen, the first thing you notice in the upper right-hand corner is something that says Morningstar category. Morningstar takes funds and breaks them into categories based on what they're trying to do and the parameters of their investing goals. The next thing that you can see there below that is something that says percent ranking category and number of funds in the category. So when you look at that, if you look at the left-hand side now, where it says number in category, you see 821. And then right above that, you see percent ranking category, you see 28. Here's what this means. You want your score to be like golf. You want a low number. 1 is the best and 100 is the worst, which makes 50 exactly average. So if you're looking for something that's above average, you want their percent rank in your category to be something that is actually between a 1 and a 50. You can see a line here with the top green arrow that says trailing returns. And so what this is saying is in the last 1, 3, 5, and 10 years and since inception, we can see what this fund's rank was in category. So you can see that it was 28th percentile, in the 3-year it was 4th percentile, in the 5-year it was 5th percentile. Those are great numbers when we're looking at percent rank within category. Now, this data that I'm showing you here is intentionally old, as I'm trying to illustrate a concept, not trying to recommend or detract from a fund. But you can get the idea from what I'm showing you about the concept of a quality check. This one would indicate that this fund is above average. This one would indicate that it perhaps is below average. So here's the same report for a different fund. And as you can tell from this data, the fund is performing well below average. You can see the trailing returns for 1, 3, 5, and 10 years. If you look at these, the number in the category, you can see in this particular category, which is high yield funds, the number in this category in the last 1 year is 2,650 funds. That means there are 2,650 choices that an investor can make if they want to have a high yield fund, okay? What the percent rank in the category is saying is that 95% of all of that number is doing better than this fund. Why would you want to stay in a fund where 95% of other funds like it are doing better than that? And you can see that not only has it been in the 95th percentile in the last year, In the last 3 years and in the last 5 years, it's also been well below average. So as you can tell from this data, this fund is performing well below average, and it has been for some time. At the point that this data was collected, which again, it's an older fund, I'm just using it to illustrate a concept. But a strong retirement plan will incorporate regular quality checks like this on each holding inside your portfolio. And when we work with clients, we actually perform this type of quality check every single quarter on every single holding for every single client. So what I want you to do now is look at your polls, and I want you to answer this question. Are you doing regular quality checks like this on your portfolio? Yes or no? Okay, great. I can see that it's a mixed bag. Some of you are doing that and some of you are not. But I think it's very important that you understand what a quality check means to be able to know if what you're in is performing in an above average or below average capacity. The next thing I want to talk about is called sequence of returns risk. And panic can be avoided in retirement planning if your holistic retirement plan has taken into consideration this thing called sequence of returns risk. This affects people who are in their fragile decade. The fragile decade is the 5 years before you retire and the first 5 years of retirement. So I'm going to put a poll up now. Are you in your fragile decade? Are you within 5 years of retirement or still in the first 5 years of your retirement? It's that 10-year period. So go ahead and answer that. Okay, I wouldn't be surprised if you've never really heard of sequence of returns risk. Or if you have, you might be wondering, how big of a risk could this possibly be? Well, Kiplinger's, which is a leader in personal financial news, had this to say. They posted an article recently titled, "Retirees Can't Afford to Underestimate Sequence of Returns Risk." The subtitle read, "If the market tanks in the early years of your retirement, you could be in big trouble, unless you're prepared." The author went as far to say, and I agree, that sequence of returns risk, in my opinion, may be the biggest risk that retirees face. So what does sequence of returns risk even mean? Sequence of returns risk refers to the risk associated with the order of the returns that your investments receive. Still not clear? Let's try it another way. Well, we've already established that markets go up and down. Some years your returns are positive and some are negative. But it does matter that the order of good and bad years, it actually does matter. Sequence of returns risk simply means that your results are impacted by the timing of the ups and the downs. To fully grasp the dangers of sequence of returns risk, it's helpful to understand a concept called the money cycle. The money cycle is something that we all go through. Typically, the money cycle has two parts. Part one is called the accumulation phase or the savings phase. This is when you're working and you're putting money into your retirement accounts. The second phase is called the distribution or the income phase. This is when you're retired and you're drawing from these savings that you've accumulated over your years. And most Americans go directly from the accumulation phase to the distribution phase. So how does the order or the sequence of returns of your yearly rate of return impact your end result during that accumulation phase? So let's think accumulation phase, and let's take a look at a hypothetical illustration. I want to introduce you to Mrs. Lucky and Mr. Unlucky. Let's see how the order of their returns impacts their account balances during just the accumulation phase of life. So let's start with Mrs. Lucky. Mrs. Lucky deposits $100,000 into an account that averages 6% rate of return. She makes no additional deposits and takes no withdrawals from this account. This chart lists the sequence of returns for her 10-year period of time. As you can see, Mrs. Lucky saw great returns in the first 2 years, up 30% and up 20%. However, in the last 2 years, we show some very bad returns, down 20% and down 30%. By the end of that 10 years, Mrs. Lucky's $100,000 account has grown to $154,764. Now, let's take a look at Mr. Unlucky. Mr. Unlucky also deposits $100,000 into an account that averages a 6% rate of return and makes no additional deposits or takes no withdrawals. So same scenario. This chart lists the sequence of returns for his 10-year period of time. Mr. Unlucky has the opposite sequence of returns in the portfolio. Here he has the bad returns up front and the good returns at the end. So what would you expect the results to be? Well, the end result is actually still exactly the same. Mr. Unlucky wasn't any unluckier than Mrs. Lucky. His $100,000 still grew to $154,000. Remember, however, that this is during the accumulation phase where you're saving for your retirement. They each deposited the $100,000, neither took withdrawals, and they earned an average rate of return of 6%. Mrs. Lucky grew to $154,000. Mr. Unlucky's account did too. The order or the sequence of returns makes no difference during the accumulation phase. Now, let's fast forward a little bit to their retirement years. While Mrs. Lucky and Mr. Unlucky have both aged well, let's see what happens to their accounts with the same hypothetical rates of returns, but now we're going to look at the distribution phase of the money cycle. Let's start with Mrs. Lucky again. Mrs. Lucky's account still has $100,000 in it. Average rate of return is 6%, but now she's going to start taking $6,000 a year from her account because this is the distribution phase. Here's our 10-year chart, and just like before, she gets great years at the beginning and the 2 bad years at the end. And at the end of the 10 years, even after taking out $60,000 a year in total income, $6,000 a year, Mrs. Lucky is left with a portfolio value of $105,000. So still a little more than she actually started with. But how about Mr. Unlucky? What happens to him during the distribution phase when we change the sequence of returns? Mr. Unlucky's account also starts with that same $100,000, also averages 6%, and he also withdraws $6,000 a year from the account. Here's our 10-year chart, but now again, in the first 2 years of his retirement, Mr. Unlucky experiences bad years in the market. But those 2 final years are great again. So no problem, right? Everything should be the same. Unfortunately, no. Mr. Unlucky's portfolio has declined to less than $39,000. That's roughly 2/3 drop in value simply because of the sequence or the order of his returns. So how did they each fare? They both started with the same account values, they both took the same withdrawals, and they even earned the same average rate of return over the 10-year period. But Mrs. Lucky at the end of the 10 years had over $105,000, and Mr. Unlucky had just under $39,000. So which one would you rather be? And you can see how in the distribution phase, the sequence of returns makes such a difference. The sequence of returns can make a dramatic, if not disastrous, difference in that distribution phase. Just ask Mr. Unlucky. He now knows exactly why this is an issue. Okay, according to Investopedia, sequence of returns risk for the most part is a matter of luck. Interesting. If you retire in a bull market, your account may grow large enough to sustain a subsequent downturn. If you retire in a bear market, your account balance may never recover. This is not under the investor's control, but there are opportunities to limit the downside risk. I don't know about you, but having my retirement funds be a matter of luck is not something that I'm comfortable with. So, what's the moral of the story? Losing money in the early years of retirement can seriously hurt you. So there you have it. As promised, the biggest thing that can impact your retirement planning is avoiding the greatest risk to your retirement, which is sequence of returns risk. And if this concept is new to you, something you haven't even been made aware of, like I said, I wouldn't be surprised, but it's a real risk, and it's important to work with an advisor who's not only aware of it, but knows how to mitigate or manage that risk. The question is, what can you do? What steps can you take to help avoid sequence of returns risk? The first step of the process is trying to preserve the money that's in what we call the retirement red zone, the years right before and right after you retire, that fragile decade that we talked about earlier. In this area, it's critical to preserve the money that you may need sooner rather than later. And to fully understand what we're talking about, let's go back to that money cycle. Remember how most Americans go directly from the accumulation phase to the distribution phase? This is where issues can occur. In order to preserve that retirement red zone money, we need to add a new phase there in the middle of that money cycle called the preservation phase. This is the time period immediately before and immediately after retirement where you can't afford to experience a financial setback that will put these monies at risk. This is designed to help preserve the money that you're going to need sooner rather than later from extreme shocks and market declines. We add this phase between the accumulation and distribution phase in the money cycle. So now the money cycle looks like this. Accumulation phase, where you're working, saving money for retirement and building up your future. Preservation phase, designed to help preserve the money that you'll need sooner rather than later from extreme shocks and market declines. And the distribution phase, where you're retired and drawing income from your portfolio to actually live on. Now, it's one thing to know what you can do, but an entirely another thing to know how to get this done. So good news, there is a way to help preserve and possibly even grow your retirement accounts. It's called the bucket plan. The bucket plan is a 3-bucket approach of segmenting your money based on your needs and your time horizon, meaning when you're going to use the money. Basically, we divide up your money according to what you need that money to do for you and when you're likely to need it. So that's how the bucket planning philosophy works. So let's take a closer look at the purpose of each of these buckets. The now bucket refers to money you need for your living expenses. This is your safe and liquid money. And when I say safe, I literally mean money in a bank and subject to FDIC limitations. This bucket is designed to cover expenses that you might have in the next year and includes funds that you may need in an emergency, enough to feel comfortable with, as well as any other planned expenses like cars or vacations or home repairs. This bucket is designed to be protected from market fluctuations, but of course the returns in the now bucket are minimal. It probably won't even keep pace with inflation. So we don't want to have more money than is necessary in the now bucket. But what this bucket does is it buys us zero market risk and greater financial confidence. Next, we have bucket 2, the soon bucket. This is our preservation bucket. The soon bucket refers to money you may need sooner rather than later. These funds are conservatively invested and often earmarked to provide an income source that might be necessary beyond the funds in your now bucket. This is the money we may need for income or might be required to withdraw, typically in the next 2 to 10 years. 2 to 10 years. It's also meant to be an inflation hedge. So it should be invested to pursue growth, but conservative growth. By choosing conservative investments, the average returns in bucket 2 should be higher than in bucket 1. And this potential growth helps offset the rising cost of gas and groceries and other daily living expenses. The goal is to give you some protection from inflation. This is the bucket that is specifically designed to help preserve the assets of your estate and protect against inflation. The soon bucket can help reduce your exposure to market risk and potentially devastating sequence of returns risk. Finally, we have the later bucket, or bucket 3, and this has a longer term purpose. The later bucket is reserved for money you will not need for many years, which means those funds can be invested to pursue long-term growth, maybe even legacy planning. And by legacy planning, we don't necessarily mean leaving money to your kids or other heirs. We mean first and foremost providing for your surviving spouse, if that's your situation. Specifically, this is the money that gets invested to pursue growth. Funds in this bucket might also be designated to provide for the long-term care or the disability needs. The goal of this bucket is to help both preserve your estate from the financial impact of being disabled or experience a chronic long-term illness, as well as increase your estate by allowing the money set aside for later to be invested to pursue growth. Now, we all know there's no guarantees in life, and nothing could be more evident than that in the days of development of a global pandemic thanks to COVID-19. And while we can help you have all your paperwork in order and have all your affairs in order, if you become ill or incapacitated, those documents cannot protect us from the expenses of the care associated with something like this. And while medical costs can present a financial setback, that may be nothing compared to the cost of the assisted living or the nursing home. The last thing you want to have happen is to see your estate and everything you've worked hard for and sacrificed for to get wiped out entirely due to this kind of cost. So I do want to ask another poll question here. How many of you have had family members in a nursing home? Yes or no? So for those of you who are answering yes, you have likely seen the value of their resources diminish due to these health-related issues. And that's why getting your legal documents done isn't enough to fully protect your retirement assets and your estate. So that later bucket is going to help you do that. The later bucket is also designated for, like I said, legacy planning and inheritance, mostly for providing for your surviving spouse, if that's your situation. So what you might not realize, and why I say that, is how much of a financial adjustment it is when one spouse passes away. What frequently happens is income goes down, but expenses, which taxes in particular, go up, and often dramatically. This later bucket allows us to effectively plan for those type of scenarios. So let me give you an example. We'll take John and Sally here. They're married and they're over the age of 65. John receives $20,000 a year in Social Security, and Sally receives $10,000. In addition, they withdraw another $30,000 a year from their IRAs each year, so $60,000 of total income. In this scenario, based on current tax tables, their federal tax liability is just under $1,000. Now, unfortunately, John becomes ill and he moves into a nursing home for 2 years. John's nursing home cost him and Sally $7,400 a month, a huge drag on their resources. Over the 2 years, it cost them $177,000. So there's one issue that you can see you may need to plan for. Then John passes away, which left Sally as a widow who was thankfully in pretty good health still. She's now single and still over the age of 65. She is able to collect $20,000 in Social Security, which was the higher of the two payments, because if you're married and one of you passes away, you keep the higher Social Security check, but the smaller one goes away. So she no longer is receiving her payment of the $10,000. Well, Sally wants to keep that same $60,000 income. So instead of $30,000 coming out from her IRAs, she now is going to take $40,000 from her IRAs to maintain that total of $60,000 worth of income. The result is a federal tax liability now of $5,357. Now, you may remember that it was just under $1,000 previously for the same amount of annual income. So this is an increase in taxes of over $4,000. That's a tax increase of 442%. Crazy, you say. You might be wondering why, and it really comes down to two factors. Number one, Sally is now in a single tax filer bracket which means her annual income is taxed at a higher rate than a married bracket. In addition, she's withdrawing additional funds from her IRA to maintain that standard of living, and this results in an increase in taxable income because not all income is taxed the same. IRA taxation is different than Social Security taxation. So between the tax filing bracket and the increase in taxes, it's a double whammy, so to speak. But there are things that can be done to really plan for this, and that's part of the point of the later bucket. So the power of the later bucket is really about both preserving, but also increasing your overall estate and retirement plan. The bucket plan itself, like I said, is a 3-bucket approach of segmenting your money based on your needs and your time horizon. It's basically a way, again, to structure your life savings to help ensure the assets of your estate are not only preserved in your soon bucket, but also may be increased by keeping funds in the later bucket to pursue growth. And when it comes to both preserving and possibly increasing your estate, that is the power of the bucket plan. So one more poll question for you to answer right now. Do you want to talk to us about setting up your own bucket plan? Yes or no? Okay, we truly hope that learning more about the money cycle and the bucket plan approach gives you some comfort in knowing that there are things you can do to be prepared for market volatility. Specifically, the concept of the preservation phase is part of the money cycle and the companion soon bucket designed to preserve that portion of the money you may need sooner rather than later. To put it another way, the soon bucket is a powerful panic protection. Because the money you need sooner rather than later is conservative, you'll be more confident to ride out the inevitable market ups and downs, even the wild roller coaster ride that comes with a black swan event. Which brings us back to, what has COVID-19 taught us about retirement? The black swan events have happened, including the one that we're experiencing right now, and will undoubtedly happen again in the future. And just because we can't predict when we need to prepare for them, we can prepare ourselves with doing things like that. And how do we do that? With a bucket plan designed to be a simple, powerful, and effective tool for your retirement planning. Now, remember that by participating in this webinar, you're eligible for this no cost, no obligation 20-minute strategy session to learn a little bit more about you and also to get any of your specific questions answered. That's the place to come talk to me about information you've heard during this that you have questions on how it might relate to you. And as a result of that, in addition to answering your questions, we're either going to determine that there's an additional way we might be able to help you, and we'll simply schedule a follow-up call to try to discuss that. Or we'll agree that we've done everything that we can to help, you've got your questions answered, and we just simply part as friends. So if that's of interest to you, you're probably wondering what's the next step. So just go ahead and click on the button that you see on your screen, because hopefully we've given you a lot to consider. And the 20-minute strategy session just feels like the right next step. If you haven't done so already, just go ahead now and click on the button and take a couple minutes to sign up for that. Find a convenient time that works for you. Okay, one of the things that's part of this COVID-19 pandemic is that we want to get together for this strategy session virtually. Now, some people are still learning how to do that, but a lot of you have mastered how to do that. And you know what? Technology isn't perfect, but we're finding it still allows us to truly serve our clients, which is really what our passion and our goal is. So look for the 30-minute virtual session option and pick one of those times that works for you. Okay, let me close with this. Money doesn't really come with instructions, and most people need a guide. And we are here to help. As holistic fiduciary planners, we offer guidance, we offer support, and tools and a path forward towards a brighter financial future. Now, I may not have mentioned that I'm actually a pilot. I got my license in 2001, and I'm an instrument rated pilot. One of my flight instructors dreamed of quitting his day job and becoming an airplane mechanic. That's really what he wanted to do. But he didn't think he could swing it financially, and he didn't want to leave his family in the lurch. By doing some holistic planning, including collaborating with his attorneys on the estate plan and creating his own bucket plan, he was able to see a path forward that could allow him to stop working years earlier than he expected and be able to pursue his dreams. So while not everyone is able to realize their dreams with proper planning, it is possible. Special note, when I close the webinar, your screen will be redirected to the web page where you can schedule that strategy session. So thank you all for coming and learning about retirement planning despite the COVID-19 crisis. We hope this has been a valuable education, and we really do look forward to connecting with you soon at your strategy session. Thank you.